Herman Melville has a great line, all wars are boyish and are fought by boys. And it's true. Most of us were in our 20s or teens. And we didn't know from nothing, and our officers weren't much older. And we had been instilled in us absolute obedience. So we started out across this field, which to begin with is rather dubious because it was a big flat field with not a stick of anything in it. And we were just walking along, and there was a row farther on there of industrial buildings and factories. So we were just walking across this big flat field, and all of a sudden machine gun fire started. And you could hear bullets buzzing and whistling around you and so on. There was nothing to do, there was no place to hide, so all we could do was fall flat. So we all fell flat and tried to be as flat as we could on the ground, which was not too flat. I would have given anything for a depression of some sort. And there were guys around me, over 10 yards away or so, and the machine gun fire was just all over us, and we were pinned down. So I remember thinking quite consciously, okay, this is it. This is the way it's going to end. I always knew it. I never had any doubt in my mind that I was going to be killed. And I thought, okay, this is the day it's going to happen. There's no getting around this. And a bullet went off my helmet, ricocheted, boing, like that, sort of made me deaf for a couple of minutes. And then I had my full field pack on my back, and I had my mess kit in it. And afterwards, I didn't know it at the time, but afterwards I took the mess kit out, and there was a bullet hole right through it. A bullet had gone through it. So anyway, we laid there, and I thought, well, what the hell do? We just lie here. And we were talking back and forth, saying, what do we do, you know? Nothing. Somehow, one of our officers, who was behind us, called in an artillery strike to cover us. And so pretty soon, our artillery comes in, over, not missing us by far, coming over us, and a lot of what they fired were smoke bombs. So they laid out a sort of a barrier of smoke. So then the question was, is the smoke thick enough so the Germans can't see us? And you have to make quite a decision there. And finally I decided, okay, over here to our left, 40 yards or so, was a railroad track with a whole bunch of freight trains on them. And I said, okay, I'll get up and I'll run to that. And I just hope they don't see me. So I did. Finally, it was the hardest getting up decision I ever made in my life. And I ran in slow motion over there and found a boxcar and climbed up into it. Two other guys from my platoon were in there. Bob Zick was there, and he'd been shot in the neck. His blood was all over the place, and I think also in the head. And Johnny Vargo was there. Johnny hadn't been hit, neither had I. So we had been, prior to coming out in that field, we had sort of gathered together to talk about our strategy in a big farmhouse. So we decided, let's go down the track here and get back somehow to that farmhouse. And I think the Germans have been silenced. Well, about this time, a few boxcars up ahead of us, it turns out a shell hit them, and one of them, and it was full of ammo, and it started going up, exploding, and this whole thing was exploding. Fortunately, it wasn't the car we were in; that was empty. So we ran back to the farmhouse and got back there. Gradually, the guys from the platoon got away and gathered back there, those that made it. 3 or 4 were killed, several were wounded. But gradually they all somehow made their way back to that farmhouse. And the decision was then made, since we'd had quite a few losses there, to take us back off the line. And so they took us back off the line, shipped us up north to the Ruhr Valley, to a town called Wuppertal. And we were in occupation there. And our job there was to be guards of German prisoners. We took over the Wuppertal town prison and used it for German prisoners. And from then on, our duty for quite a little while was simply being guards at that prison. In that period, time is kind of vague to me there. The war ended in Germany. I remember nothing about it. Absolutely nothing. Somebody must have told me, the news must have come out. When the war ended in Japan, and by that time we were in Czechoslovakia, in occupation. I remember that very clearly, but strangely enough, I have no memory of the war ending in Germany. I guess I'd had enough of it, or I didn't care. I put it out of my mind. But that was probably as close as I ever got to really getting it. And I thought, well, for sure, this is it. There's no getting away from this. I'm caught. The first company lieutenant we had was a guy named Ike, Nat Isaacson, a big, handsome Jewish guy from the Bronx. And I really did have a lot of respect for him. I actually saved his life. The one I had when we went out in the field was a real idiot called Lieutenant Brescia, and none of us liked Lieutenant Brescia. But that day when we got back to that farmhouse,
Yeah.
we had, coming back out of the field somehow, somebody had picked up, or I guess they came over and gave up a couple of Germans. And Lieutenant Brescia took them out in the backyard and shot them. He was in a rage because he had walked us into an ambush. I think that was it. And he was just roaring mad, and he wanted to kill any German he saw. We thought it might not be smart to go and leave the pillboxes behind us full of Nazis. So we had to investigate them and see if any German soldiers were there. Well, I was crawling down the tunnel, and I saw that the Germans had hung a gunny sack over the opening into the pillbox. And through it I could see faint wavering light, like a candle, which as a matter of fact it was. So I thought, uh-oh. So I was crawling my way along there, and I kind of pushed the gunny sack aside, and there, sitting at a table, was a dead German officer with a Luger in his hand. He had chosen to shoot himself. The other guys had retreated, had left. Well, it was a pretty eerie scene. I think it was one of the more eerie scenes out of the war. We would walk and walk and walk, and sometimes go a couple of nights without sleeping. Or you'd sleep in a half-frozen foxhole except you wouldn't sleep. And it was cold. It was a bitter cold winter, that winter in Europe. As far as being afraid was concerned, I guess I took a very fatalistic view. I figured, okay, I'm going to get shot. Whatever day it happens, it'll happen. And I don't care. In a way, I'll be glad to get out of this. Because the whole thing was like a nightmare. A long, ongoing nightmare that you know you can't wake up out of. I've had nightmares at home where I thought to myself, I've got to wake up. And I did. Got out of it, you know. But I knew I'm not going to wake up out of this. And just get me out of it somehow, you know. And I read somewhere, some guy had been in the infantry about it. They were walking along in single file, just on top of each other, sleeping as they walked. And that sounds unlikely, but it happened. You sleep in the dirt. One night I slept in a pile of horse manure because it was warm. And what you're doing is simply living like animals. And like animals, the only thing you can think about is staying alive. So you just walk and walk and walk across fields and through forests and into villages and on down another road. And somebody, sometimes I didn't even know who, the word would come down the line, when you get to the next crossroads, turn left and go down there, and say, okay, I'll go down that place. So I was totally, I guess it was good in a way, I was totally disoriented. I didn't know where I was, I didn't know what time it was, I didn't know what date it was, I didn't know what was going on in the world out there, you know, it was just total disorientation. I didn't think about what are the moral consequences of this, or what are the geopolitical, you know, nothing. It's just, you're out in the field and you're being shot at and you shoot back at somebody else. And you collapse with fatigue and fall into a foxhole, sleep there.